Today, Trump takes matters into his own hands with new executive orders while his agenda faces big hurdles in Congress. What the president is telling Punchbowl News about the SAVE Act and his relationship with Republican lawmakers. Then, what we know about the outlines of a deal to reopen the Strait of Hormuz as Congress pushes the White House for more transparency on the war. Plus, we just got July's job report. What it says about the state of the economy as high prices remain a top issue for voters. Money, Power, Politics is just getting started on this Friday morning. Good morning to you. Happy Friday. We have made it. TGIF. I am Ariel Reshef in for Steph Rule today. It is 9 a.m. on the East Coast, 6 a.m. out west. Good morning, everyone. We are 88 days away from the midterms. And as we come on the air today, there is big breaking news. The road for Todd Blanche to be confirmed as permanent Attorney General just got a lot tougher. Alaska Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski, we've been waiting on her. She now says she's a no vote, joining Senator Susan Collins. That means one more Republican no vote would sink Blanche's nomination. Everything is now hinging on Senator Bill Cassidy. That may sound familiar. Meanwhile, President Donald Trump is once again pushing Republican lawmakers hard to vote on his agenda. And in a new interview with Punchbowl News, Trump talked about his party's chances in the midterms and his voting restrictions bill, the SAVE Act. Listen.
What's the disconnect between you and Thune?
Well, we have no disconnect. I think we have a good relationship, but I view that as a very important thing. It's voter ID. If you just even take the ballots out of it, you know, the ballots are very important, but we do that another time. Voter ID, and it's proof of citizenship. And I figure you can't get any more basic than that. It's very important. Save America Act is a very important thing. John's trying. He's trying hard. I really believe that. But if he doesn't get there, it would be unfortunate.
How do you handicap it now, House and Senate?
I think we're going to win. But, you know, I look at, I'll be honest, I look at this. Not everybody was a bad president. We've had good presidents. And even good presidents, they tend to lose the midterm. So I don't know what that is. Other than that, I'd say we should win easily.
Not exactly his trademark confidence there. Last night, John Thune said that there would be some kind of vote today on Trump's Save America Act, while Republicans on the Hill want to rack up some legislative wins to try to help them out with the midterms. It seems like Trump has other priorities at this moment. He signed a pair of new orders targeting birthright citizenship. One would narrow exactly who is eligible for birthright citizenship, and the other would outlaw so-called birth tourism, which is already illegal. As the Supreme Court affirmed earlier this year, birthright citizenship is a constitutional right, and polls show it is broadly popular with the American people. Another apparent Trump priority, a new executive order about vaccines and autism. We've seen this before. Experts maintain there is no link between those two. 4 sources tell the Washington Post the White House officials are currently drafting the order that would focus on the childhood vaccine schedule. Republican pollsters have warned that this is an extremely divisive issue that could hurt Republicans ahead of the midterms. Now, I want you to remember, want to hear from you. What are your questions? What do you want to know about the midterms, the war with Iran, maybe the economy? So many of us are hurting these days because of it. Any of today's big news stories, you can scan that QR code right there on your screen and send us your questions, and we will try to answer them later in the show. I really hope you'll do that. And with that, let's bring in our leadoff panel, Kat Zakrzewski, White House correspondent for The Washington Post, Jake Sherman, MS Now political contributor and co-founder of Punchbowl News, and Mark Leibovich, staff writer for The Atlantic. Jake, you've had quite a 24-hour stretch here. I do want to get to your great interview with the president, but first, let's talk about this huge news overnight that Senator Murkowski is now saying she's a no on Todd Blanche. Now all of this rests with Bill Cassidy. We've seen, this is what I was alluding to before, we've seen this movie when it came to the RFK nomination and confirmation hearings. Where does it look like he's headed right now? What's the math?
Good question, but remember, Bill Cassidy's political career is over because of Donald Trump. Plainly, right? Trump endorsed against him, and now he has to suffer the consequence, and that Bill Cassidy owes him nothing, zero. And that's a tough position for the White House to be in here. I don't know where he's going to end up. He's been having endless conversations and all these all these holdouts, now 2 of whom have gone no, Collins and Murkowski, have had kind of endless conversations with Cassidy and with Blanche. I don't know where he's going to end up, but unless Mitch McConnell, who has been out now for a couple months with, I'm not exactly sure how they're classifying it, but had a fall and is not well, unless he somehow comes back. Todd Blanche is done if Bill Cassidy votes no. And he could stay in as acting AG. And I talked to Trump about that. Trump said, he'll be happy to have him as acting, but he should be confirmed. But listen, this is the world that the White House has to live with because they have antagonized so many Senate Republicans. And when you do so, it's much more difficult to get your agenda through a Senate when people are against you.
Yeah, the fealty starts to dissipate slightly when you target and unseat incumbents in your own party. So you mentioned that Blanche can hang in as acting AG. How long can he do that for? Could it be for the duration of the Trump administration? And then does he have sort of carte blanche to carry out the president's agenda with the DOJ?
Well, those are 2 questions. I think yes, he could stay as acting for the rest of the administration because as long as it's a technicality, but as long as his nomination is active, meaning at the end of this Congress, he would probably have to, the president would probably have to resubmit his nomination. But yes, I mean, Biden did this with Julie Su, who was the acting labor secretary for quite some time. The question about whether he has any diminished authority as acting AG is not something that's really been tested. I mean, from a precedential level, meaning the precedent that it's set, it's not great. But I do think that he could carry out, from what I've been told, he could carry out all the duties of the attorney general while being acting AG.
Tell us more about your interview with the president, Jake.
Yeah, it was fascinating. I mean, we talked to him about Congress, which is what we cover, and an institution that he has a complicated relationship with. And I thought one of the clips that you played was very interesting because he doesn't really have any grip, or he's confused, and it is a confusing topic about why presidents always lose in the midterm election. I explained to him that I think it's because people want to check on power, and Trump thinks that he's done so well that that no one should want to check on his power. And he said also on top of that, he can't guarantee that Republicans will come out, the Republicans that voted for him, the voters that put him in the White House twice now, will come out and support congressional Republicans for, House and Senate seats. And that is a very fascinating insight into his thinking at this moment in time as we sit, as you said, 80-something days, 88 days before the midterm elections.
Yeah, it's a bleak assessment, like I said at the top there, for a man who's generally pretty confident, even if it's smoke and mirrors. Mark, Senator Tillis and Cornyn bent themselves into a proverbial pretzel to send Blanche's nomination out of the committee. Now you see a rebuke. It was not just Susan Collins. Now it's Murkowski. And you may see Cassidy, based on what Jake was just illuminating, the fact that he was unseated by a Trump-backed candidate. So what does all of this say about the president's leverage on Capitol Hill?
Well, I mean, it says a few things. I mean, first of all, I mean, yes, I mean, this is the YOLO caucus, meaning, they don't have anything to really, think about reelection wise, because Trump has already, in his own way, kind of undermined all of them. But as we've learned from John Cornyn and Thom Tillis, there are ways to get these folks on the team and get them back on board. I mean, in some ways, Murkowski and Collins were certainly, there's nothing safe about them, but I think Democrats would have probably pointed to them as being the 2 most likely no votes. And then it all comes down to Cassidy, unless, as Jake mentioned, McConnell somehow becomes ambulatory enough to come to the floor and vote for Blanche. But, it's unclear what McConnell would even do if he got that far. Either way, I mean, Cassidy is a wild card. There are 2 ways of looking at this. One, he owes the president nothing, as you mentioned. But on the other hand, I mean, do you really want to ride into retirement with this whole load of hassle on the way out and just getting hated left and right? There is a, do I really need this headache, mindset that I think can set in also. So it'll be fascinating. We'll see what happens. And I also think, by the way,
indeed.
Yeah, sorry. No, I was just going to say.
No, go ahead.
No, the idea of whether, he can sort of not be confirmed and serve anyway is kind of another wild card here. It does seem like he can get a lot done and do a lot of bidding for the president if he stays on for a long time, whether he's confirmed or not.
That really is an interesting dynamic we need to keep a close eye on. How long can he just be acting and carry out the president's agenda? Kat, Trump is adamant about pushing through his legislative agenda before Congress goes on its very long recess in August. He told Jake that he likes John Thune, and he's not looking to push him out. But what happens if Thune falls short?
Certainly, we've seen the president willing to go on the attack when he feels that he does not have the support of his allies. And we've seen just over the last few weeks, he's put pressure on Thune in public remarks, telling his constituents to call the senator. And so there is a lot of pressure on Thune today as Trump tells him he needs to bring this to the floor, even though it doesn't seem like the votes are there. And it just speaks to this bigger challenge, I think, for Republicans in Congress, where Trump really is trying to cast a lot of blame on them in this midterm cycle. One of the most fascinating parts of Jake's interview to me was when the president talked about how voters are angry with Republicans, but not him.
Yeah, so Kat, they may be mad at Republicans and not him, but that is certainly not what is bearing out in the polling that we're looking at. Trump's polling numbers from several different polls in the last few weeks have shown him at record lows against himself in his first term and now record lows in the second term. How does all of that factor into the treatment that he's going to get on the Hill? Are Republicans slowly and belatedly untethering themselves from the president?
It seems like as we get closer to the general elections in this midterm cycle, they're going to have to do that if you look at the polling. Just this morning, we got job numbers that are bad for the White House. You see what's going on with persistently sticky high gas prices. And as you get to this new phase of the election, there's going to have to be an attempt from Republicans to create some distance between themselves and these policies.
Jake, it's been a very tumultuous 24 hours for President Trump, having nothing to do with your interview. A candidate that he endorsed, Andy Ogles, lost his primary in Tennessee. Ogles has been one of the president's, let's just say, staunchest or most loyal soldiers. What does that signal? Is his grip on the party slipping, or is this just a one-off example?
Well, we'd also be remiss not to mention that one of his endorsed candidates in Michigan lost to somebody who had stopped campaigning months before and wasn't even effectively in the race, and was writing handwritten notes to the FEC saying, I'm not going to be running anymore, because he couldn't find out how to log on to the FEC system. So really quite the string there of political events for the president. That said, listen, I mean, the president likes to say he has a 99% or something like that track record in endorsing people. It's not that high. I mean, he endorses a lot of people who don't even have races. But, I mean, still, he has an incredible grip on the party. Is it loosening? Yes, it probably is. It probably is. I mean, Andy Ogles was a loyal foot soldier for President Trump and against it many times the House Republican leadership, member of the Freedom Caucus, and lost quite resoundingly. But still, the vast majority of people who are endorsed by Trump, who get Trump's endorsement, do win their primaries.
Mark, while voters have made it very clear that their big issue here in this election is the economy, the cost of living, Trump is still focused, as we mentioned off the top, on birthright citizenship, voting restrictions, and here we go again with vaccines. How will all of that go over with his base? But more importantly, how will it go over with the coalition that was so critical to getting him elected in 24? Is that coalition disintegrating?
Yeah, I mean, certainly there's no indication whatsoever that any of this is a political winner for Republicans. I mean, to say nothing of the ballroom and the reflecting pool and things that he seems to be occupying a great deal of his time with. I mean, this is not something that was a big campaign issue, to say the least, in 2024. Look, I mean, I think to some degree it doesn't matter because Trump's appeal and his hold on the party has been so personal to begin with. I think it gets to sort of a larger existential problem that Republicans are beginning to deal with and are going to have to deal with with more and more, which is that when Trump's not on the ballot, their voters haven't turned out. They certainly haven't turned out in midterms. They didn't turn out in 22. They didn't turn out in 18. And that's a big problem for them. And obviously, Trump's not going to be on the ballot in 2028. And they're going to figure out a way to solve that. But there's nothing that indicates that Trump's appeal and his hold on the party is transferable to any one figure, whether it's a down ballot candidate or someone running to replace him.
Yeah, turnout will be a critical piece of this, especially when you see the high energy and motivation for Democrats to be turning out right now. Kat, thank you so much. Don't take it personally, but everyone else is sticking around with me. Coming up, as talks to reopen the Strait of Hormuz continue, lawmakers are demanding answers about where those talks stand right now. And there's also major concern over reports of dwindling U.S. munitions. Money, Power, Politics is back here in 90 seconds. Don't go anywhere. Two Middle East diplomats tell MS Now that Iran and Oman have agreed to the outlines of a deal that would reopen the Strait of Hormuz, but they declined to describe what's exactly in that deal, and all of it kind of remains unresolved at this point. With the war in Iran now in its 6th month, Vice President J.D. Vance briefed Senate Republicans on what comes next. Those senators are sure to face a lot of questions about the war and the cost of it when they head home this weekend. Constituents are not pleased. Politico reports some of the lawmakers push Vance and the administration for more transparency, especially considering the vast unpopularity of this war. MS Now contributor Inzamam Rashid is in Dubai for us. Jake and Mark are still with us. Inzamam, bring us up to speed on what the state of this deal may be between Oman and Iran. What could it look like, and how soon could we see the strait reopened?
Well, Ariel, there's been a lot of optimism from Iranians that I've been speaking to throughout the week that this deal is pretty much finalized and that it's ready to be rolled out. A deal between Iran and Oman, effectively looking at how they can manage the Strait of Hormuz temporarily before there is a kind of permanent solution in place. And a couple of Iranian sources who are in fact linked with this deal that I was speaking to throughout the week said to me that it has been finalized. It includes the fact that all inbound traffic would effectively go through Iranian territorial waters and outbound traffic would pass through near to the Omani coast. The officials also said to me that there would be no fees and tolls in this agreement, and that this is a temporary agreement that would effectively kickstart another 60 days for discussions to take place around that memorandum of understanding, remember, which was signed in mid-June between the US and Iran. But there's been concern over the last 24 hours or so because they've said that this is ready to go, but it still needs to pass through a couple of stages. It needs to get approval from the Supreme Leader, whether he's alive and is actually able to approve it. It also needs to get approval from Iran's Supreme Council. That includes the military, the IRGC, the guys who have effectively been attacking ships in the Strait of Hormuz for the past 5 months. And the sense that I'm getting, Ariel, from conversations that I'm having is that there is a sticking point here, and that's the fact that it's not entirely clear whether the US naval blockade would be lifted in the Strait of Hormuz to essentially then have this deal go forward. And if that isn't the case, then I don't think the IRGC will essentially pass this deal and approve it. And that would obviously mean that this whole negotiation that's been taking place over the last couple of months is effectively dead in the water. But this is something that clearly the Iranians and the Omanis are trying to work towards, along with the mediators, Pakistan and Qatar too. So we're in this kind of state of limbo once again, as we have been for quite some time with this whole conflict. But the latest is that we're just waiting for this official sign-off and then the official announcement from the two countries.
Yeah, and it may be that we don't know how the U.S. is going to respond to potentially lifting its blockade, because we know that the U.S. and Iran are not speaking directly. Of course, there are probably conduits speaking behind the scenes. But, Mark, when you hear Inzamam say something like the Iranians are optimistic, red flags about any kind of situation where the Iranians would be optimistic. How concerning or how detrimental could it be to the president's case on this war that Iran appears to be calling the shots in the Strait of Hormuz?
I mean, it's politically potentially devastating, especially within his own party. I mean, I think he's obviously trying to project control, someone who has, complete authority over this situation. Obviously he doesn't. And I think, again, to the midterms and to how people perceive this, any of these ins and outs and just this ongoing negotiation, which seems to have, whether the Iranians are optimistic or not, seems to have no end in sight, is not going to, one, provide any pricing relief, certainly on gas prices anytime soon, at least on a consistent level, but also is something that I think that polls will show that voters are either tuned out or certainly dug in a way that their opinion on this war, which is very dubious, is not going to change one way or the other.
Let's talk for a second about those who are in control of this war. The president seems, at least right now, to be standing publicly by Secretary Pete Hegseth. He's insisting that there's no issue also with U.S. THAAD and Patriot and other system supplies, despite all of the reporting to the contrary. He seems to have been acquiescing a bit that this is on his radar, at least, but not admitting that it's a full-scale problem. Just how big of a concern is it that we have this depletion of U.S. munitions, and could this be the issue that actually drives the irreparable wedge between President Trump and Hegseth?
Well, I think certainly the issue is real. If the Washington Post report, I think it was the Washington Post, right? Yeah, the report earlier this week was devastating. And it was also, I think, if you look at how the White House and the DOD reacted, they were really, really upset about this. And you wonder sort of, is Trump upset about the report because, in fact, it puts you at a tactical disadvantage and now it's public? Or is he just upset about it because of the leaks? He seems to be talking publicly, at least, more about his fury at, the breaches of secrecy, within the administration and finding the leakers and so forth. So, look, I do think, though, it looked like a very solid report in the Post, and it certainly reveals some vulnerabilities going forward, and also some difference of opinion in how the U.S. is prosecuting this war.
We're going to talk a lot more about the technicalities of the munitions shortage coming up here. But by the way, the White House responded to the Washington Post reporting by saying it was 100% fake news. Not so surprising to hear that. And that exchange between Hegseth and Trump, where he was angry about the potential low munitions, never happened. Jake, how much pressure are Republican lawmakers going to feel from their voters over these coming weeks when they go back home and they have to face the music on this war?
Yeah, it's an unpopular war. There's no question about it, as echoes of, although this is a much more narrow conflict, much more narrow than 2006 in Iran. But you have an unpopular president and an unpopular foreign conflict. With a host of ethics scandals on Capitol Hill. It feels like we're about 20 years ago when Democrats took the majority from Republicans in the House in George W. Bush's final midterm election. And listen, it's not, it doesn't pass the straight face test to say that the Pentagon doesn't need any more money at all for anything, because the Pentagon's asking for like $60 to $80 billion from Congress to do just this.
67 billion, right? Something like that.
Yeah. That's right. But they've gone as high as 300 billion. In conversations, this is to replenish depleted weapon systems. That's partially what this is about. And that is the reason that we're in this long kind of tortured discussion over what we call budget reconciliation, because the Pentagon needs this money and needs it now. And Trump said to me yesterday that this is something that the Pentagon needs. So they clearly need money. I think, if I'm reading the tea leaves, the White House thinks it does put them at a tactical disadvantage to not have this as a secret, to have this information out there. So yeah, I think it's a big political and substantive issue.
Yes, we can take two things to be true at the same time. It could compromise national security that we have this information out in the open. We can also take the information and say how concerning it truly is. Inzamam Rashid, thank you so much. Jake, Mark, thank you both. First up, after the break, the July jobs report was just released. What it tells us about the health of our labor market as President Trump tries to sell Americans a rosy picture of our economy. And later, data center construction turns pretty political as they start popping up in more and more areas across the country. You may be experiencing this. And the man behind one of those big projects, Mr. Wonderful, there you see him, big-time investor Kevin O'Leary himself, how the community is now pushing back and what he's promising. You're watching Money, Power, Politics. Get your coffee. Come right back. Let's get down to business, shall we? We have breaking news on the state of the U.S. economy. New jobs numbers out this morning show the U.S. lost 23,000 jobs in July, falling short of expectations for 83,000 jobs. Joining me now, Catherine Rampell, economics editor for The Bulwark and MS Now anchor, and Seth Harris, former deputy director of President Biden's National Economic Council and former acting U.S. Secretary of Labor under President Obama. He is also the host of the Power Half Hour podcast. Seth, what are your biggest takeaways when you hear those numbers from the report this morning?
Ariel, this report is grim, and I think working people are experiencing it in exactly that way. We lost jobs last month. Job growth this year has been extremely weak. Wage growth has slowed down. The wage growth that we have had has been largely wiped out by the inflation caused by President Trump's war with Iran. The job growth that we have is overwhelmingly concentrated in just a couple of sectors of the economy. Healthcare continues to grow even when jobs decline. In most of the rest of the economy, we're either flat when it comes to jobs or we are declining when it comes to jobs. And maybe the most troubling number in this report is that the United States of America now has 1.3 million fewer workers than it had 1 year ago. From July to July, we've lost 1.3 million workers, more than 250,000 of them since last month. So a lot of those people are good quality workers, people who are committed to our country, who are being deported because they are undocumented. But a lot of those are people who are just leaving the labor market because there's very little hope of good quality jobs for them.
I want to just drill down on the numbers that we got this morning. If you can clarify for viewers out there, for me, myself, when I look at these numbers, it says 23,000 jobs were lost. That falls short of the expectation of 83,000. It sounds like a glimmer of hope, is it not?
I don't see a lot of hope. You have to sort of look back over the last several months. The last 3 months have been extremely slow in jobs growth, about 20,000 jobs on average over the last 3 months. The big job growth happened back in March and April, and there was cause for optimism then that what turned out to be a boomlet might be a trend. And let me just say, we always have to be careful about drawing too many conclusions from one jobs report. But the quarter trend that we have right now shows us that things are going poorly. And it really all began in February when the president launched his war against Iran. That's when inflation kicked up and wiped out workers' wages. That's when job growth slowed down in the economy. And then the president piled on by adding tariffs back into the conversation, both with Canada and with the world at large. And that also is contributing to slowing the labor market. We know that the economy as a whole is only growing at a 1.5% rate in the last quarter. This weak jobs report is consistent with that weak economic growth report.
And yet, Catherine, the president gives himself an A+. In the past, he said A+++++, so there's a few less pluses. But, how does the president's performance square up with what he's saying?
Well, I would say that there's a little bit of great inflation in addition to the regular kind of inflation that we're experiencing. Look, this president only wants to take credit for good things and, of course, absolves himself of all blame for bad things. And normally you would hear someone like me say the president gets too much credit when the economy is good, too much blame when the economy is bad. And that is typically the case. Presidents don't exert that much control over big economic forces, except in this case. It turns out that presidents can't do a whole lot to improve the economy or to lower prices for that matter, but they can do quite a bit to make all of those things worse, which is what we are seeing with the war, as Seth pointed out, but also what we're seeing with these trade wars, just as an example. Trade wars are among the reasons why inflation has been extremely stubborn. It had been coming down up until basically Liberation Day of April of 2025, and since then has been ticking up. Then you layer on to that the war driving up oil prices and other energy prices, and we're going to see higher food prices as well because fertilizer costs are going up. So all of those things are feeding into worse economic conditions in terms of higher prices, in terms of slower growth, all of the things that economists do not want to see, that the Fed does not want to see, and that I would lay squarely at the feet of Donald Trump.
I really appreciate that you brought that point home, that generally speaking, there's a limit to how much power the president exerts over the economy. But in this case, like so many cases under President Trump, there's extenuating circumstances made by him. Catherine, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is saying that the K-shaped economy is a thing of the past. The delta between the rich and poor is dead. Let's listen to what he said on CNBC.
I got sick of hearing about this K-shaped economy. I can say here definitively the K-shaped economy is over, and we're seeing more of a C economy where the lower end of wage earners are finally clawing it back, just like they did in President Trump's first term.
He's tired of hearing about the K-shaped economy. One can surmise why that is. What message does it send, though, to millions of Americans who are indeed struggling with everyday costs and feel like they can't catch up?
He may be tired of hearing about the K-shaped economy, but I think most Americans are tired of living in the K-shaped economy. And look, this jobs report, as well as other recent data that we have seen, again, reinforces the suffering, the resentment, economic resentment, if nothing else, that we have been seeing, particularly in the lower to middle part of the income distribution. That's the bottom part of the K, because their prices are going up, their wages are not keeping up, there are fewer jobs available, as it turns out, as we learned today, and things do not seem to be heading in a different direction. They do not seem to be turning around. I appreciate that Scott Bessent wants to go all Sesame Street and apply different shaped letters to the economic conditions that we are seeing right now. But the reality is the reality. You can tell voters to stop feeling dour about the fact that their paychecks are not stretching as far as they used to. But I really don't think that's going to work. And Seth probably knows that, that was not an effective communication strategy for Joe Biden when the Biden administration initially, sort of downplayed inflation. It's not an effective strategy for presidents in general to not sort of validate the feelings of American voters when their economic means are not keeping up with economic conditions. And it's especially not an effective strategy for this president, for his team, for people like Scott Bessent, when, again, they are the driving forces behind that sense of frustration because they're driving up prices and they're basically paralyzing the economy with uncertainty because of the war, because of trade, because of mass deportations, and every other form of uncertainty and pain that the administration has been inflicting upon the American people.
You made the point that I was going to, which is that, President Biden, I'm sorry to say it's that President Biden came under some serious criticism for kind of telling Americans it's not as bad as you think it is. What you're feeling isn't what you're feeling. And we saw how that affects the electorate. Catherine, Seth, thank you both so much for your insights. Really appreciate you. When we come back, the uproar in Utah over a large data center and the high-profile investor that's right in the middle of it. My colleague Josh Einiger has been on the ground and digging into this story. AI is such a big deal right now. He joins us when Money, Power, Politics returns. AI data centers have now become a political issue. They've entered the political chat with voters on the right and the left united in opposition. In this week's primaries in Michigan and Kansas, voters rewarded progressive candidates who are calling for tough crackdowns on those centers. MS Now senior reporter Josh Einiger has been following all of the backlash across the nation. He joins me now. And Josh, I know you just got back from Utah, where there's a data center that's being built by a high-profile investor.
Well-known investor.
How's that landing?
Well, I mean, it has not landed well, certainly for politicians in the state of Utah, Ariel, as you talk about these primaries that we just saw in the last couple of days. And the primaries in Utah, maybe about 6 weeks ago, several longtime politicians were just turfed out of office in the primaries. And that was only about a month or two after this fury began in Box Elder County, Utah, which is in the extreme north of Utah. It's a very rural area. It is a massive project that has taken the political scene in Utah by storm.
At the northernmost edge of Utah, miles from anywhere, sits a vast no man's land. An unspoiled expanse in Box Elder County. which could soon be the site of one of the biggest data centers on the planet. It's ignited outrage across Utah, the community concerned about their already scarce resources and furious about a lack of transparency in government.
It's not real information, and we sit here like it's okay.
Some career politicians have already been toppled, and all before a single piece of dirt has been moved. The original proposal, approved with no public comment by a little-known state agency in May, would develop 3 chunks of land totaling 40,000 acres at the northern tip of the Great Salt Lake. That's the size of more than 2 Manhattans. After public outrage, project developers cut the plan in half.
That's going to use 9 billion watts of power. That's the energy consumption rate of 40,000 Walmart supercenters. We could be talking about 10 or 12 degrees of Fahrenheit temperature change across this whole area within this valley. So that's drying out a landscape that's already pretty dry.
Investor Kevin O'Leary, best known from the reality show Shark Tank, is the data center's developer. He's vigorously defended the proposal on social media, and his team has released these renderings of modern buildings across the land. But still,
we actually have very few details because his organization has provided very few details.
We really screwed this up. We have not communicated what we do. I have no interest in causing an environmental disaster on my legacy. That's never going to happen.
But when it comes to those burning questions, how the site will generate power, how much heat it'll give off, or water it'll use, he says he just doesn't know the answers. His engineers still figuring it all out.
And that is what gets, Ariel, to the tension of many of these data center proposals, because O'Leary is just a developer. He's like the middleman. Let's say he's designing a strip mall. And let's call this a shopping center, right? He doesn't know yet who the tenants are going to be. Is there going to be a restaurant that needs venting for cooking, for example? Is there going to be a hair salon that needs sinks, right? He's just building the shell, and that's kind of how it works with the data center. He does not yet have the tenants lined up, the Anthropics or the OpenAIs, which hyperscaler is going to come in, because they all have different specs. And only at that point will he be able to communicate the specs to the public and apply for permits and things like that. And that is, he says, why he's in the box that he's in.
Can't give as many answers.
Can't give the details people want, but then they look at the laws of physics and they say, well, I mean, this thing could be 9 gigawatts. It's like, it would be one of, if not the biggest data center on the planet. And it generates a lot of heat. What's he going to do with the heat? He can't answer that. And then we get into this loop.
All kinds of things.
Exactly.
So we know that you also went to another municipality there in Utah, and they had a very different experience with a data center there. What was that like?
So Meta, the parent company of Facebook and Instagram, in 2018 decided it wanted to build a data center in Utah, in a city called Eagle Mountain, Utah. It's about 200 miles away from what we're talking about in Box Elder County. It's a rodeo town. You're looking at video there. It still has a lot of that
Makes me feel
old
right
West
at home.
innocence. Exactly, right? But they say they worked very closely with Meta when it came in that development stage, and they set a lot of the parameters, and Meta engaged with the community and community leaders and government officials in that town. And since then, they've built this 4.5 million square foot data center. There's a drone shot of it right there. It's on the outskirts of town. They say they're going to return more water than they take from the community by the end of this decade. They've made contributions to 20 conservation groups in Eagle Mountain. They've bankrolled things in the schools, and you can't find anybody in that town who says they don't like Meta. I'm sure some don't, and they've had issues elsewhere in the country, but in Eagle Mountain, it's been pretty popular and pretty symbiotic. That's how it could be.
A collaborative model.
But it's not how it is in so many other places across the country, including just a few hundred miles up the road.
And we are seeing the political fallout as a result. Josh Einiger, always fantastic reporting. Love to have you with us. And you should definitely, of course, and you should see that QR code on your screen. Take a picture of it. You can scan it. You can watch Josh's full report that's available right now on MS Now's YouTube page. I promise it's worth the watch.
With Secure,